was just saying to your colleague about the Church of Norway, and which I didn't even know existed until this morning.
Church of Norway, yeah. Of course, we are part of the. We are in full communion with the Church of England. So yes.
You're in. I did not know that.
Oh, no, we have
communion.
because we have you kind of it's equivalent. We have the ecclesiastical equivalent of the EU. You know, we have full communion between all the Lutheran churches in Europe and the Church of England, and the Episcopal Church in Scotland and Ireland and so.
Is that a completely transitive relationship? Does it work in both directions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Works in both directions. So of course, and the main issue was of course the episcopacy. So when we agreed on that at the end, then we have a common agreement. Then there will always be representatives of Church of England bishops in our consecrations of bishops and vice versa, because that's an essential part of the ecclesiology of the Church of England, and you have to have bishops. Yeah. And the bishops have the guarantee of the continuation of the apostolic faith from the apostles. And so.
Do you call yourself here a Catholic church?
No, we're not a Catholic church. We're we are definitely a Protestant church.
Then you get Anglo-Catholics, and
yeah. But of course, the fascinating thing with the Anglican tradition is that they have a vast, between the Anglo-Catholics and the Calvinists, also the Puritans.
Yes.
But we are in the middle because we are Lutherans, and we are much more emphasizing the biblical theology much more than the framework of the church. But then the Church of England, they have always, Henry VIII initiated only in the start, he initiated a national Catholic church.
Yes.
And then you had the rife between the different theological things then.
You haven't had similar battles within
Yes, but on other things than the ritual. That goes, and we have the fighting of biblical theology then. What is the pure learning of things then? So,
yes.
Yeah. But sociologically and structurally we are very similar, because we were a kind of established monolithic church, totally dominating our countries after the Reformation. So of course, yeah. But if you're going to have a Scandinavian similarity to the Church of England, that's the Church of Sweden, because the Swedish king, he was that was almost the exact same process, because all the Catholic bishops of Sweden, they just converted to being Lutheran bishops, because the king of Sweden nationalized the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Just cut off the ties with the Pope, and then afterwards you had a kind of theological reformation. But initially it was just a structural thing, just as here then. So it wasn't a theological reformation in England. It was Henry VIII wanted to have control over the wealth and the power and everything. Yeah.
But from what I was reading this morning, and my reading is Wikipedia and slight.
Yeah. So I think I can fill in a little bit.
Yeah. It seemed as if you broke from the papacy.
Yeah.
Almost at the same time. So almost immediately after Henry VIII broke, the Norwegian church did, and it became an established church with the king at the head.
Yes. And of course, you have this extra thing then, and then you can kind of not necessarily immediately compare it, but it's a kind of situation like England and Scotland, Denmark and Norway. The only huge important difference is that Denmark just took control over Norway. It wasn't a kind of unifying of two countries, but it was just the king of Denmark used the Reformation as to just get full control over Norway. And that was so the Reformation in Norway was a purely political thing, for the king to just take full control of Norway. So because the Catholic Archbishop of Norway was the last Norwegian in the State Council of Denmark-Norway. And then the new Danish king, who was a Lutheran, he was a theological, a spiritual Lutheran, and he wanted the Lutheran Reformation theologically and politically. And then he just used it as a vehicle to take full control over Norway. So then the theological and spiritual reformation of Norway took much longer time, because it was a little bit like Ireland, and it was a kind of our identity being Catholics, but step by step then, of course, we became Protestant in our tradition. And of course, the celibacy was never in Norway, not in Catholic time, and of course not in the Protestant time then. So of course you have had Norwegian presence since the medieval age, but then here you have the Danish Norwegian church in Wapping, which were consecrated in
so on the other side of the river?
Yes.
Okay, so that's no longer there?
That's no longer there. That was pulled down in the 18th century, but it was built and consecrated in 1696, after the Great Fire in 1666. You needed timber and ships and workforce, and then you had a lot of Danes and Norwegian coming then. And the king, this was the third the third non-Anglican church that were built and allowed to have non-Anglican services in Britain after the Reformation. So after the Huguenots and after the Germans, that was the third church. So that church was allowed by the king to be built, serving the Norwegian Danish population then.
And at that point, the Anglican Church wouldn't have been in full communion with...
No communion, absolutely,
Yeah.
no, because they didn't reckon us as a genuine church, because we didn't have genuine bishops. We just had some kind of, artificial things. But they recognized we were common Protestant churches, so of course it was recognizable, absolutely. On the 17th of May?
Yeah.
That's our Constitution Day.
Okay.
So of course then that's the later part of the story when we then broke free from Denmark. Because that's, now we have, this is of course the political story of Scandinavia, which was a bloody corner of Europe. But of course, during the Napoleonic age, and you had all this fighting between Russians, Prussians, Austrian, France, England, Britain, and back and forth, and then Russia took Finland from Sweden, and Finland had been part of Sweden for 700 years, and they took Finland and made it a princedom as part of Russia then. And then Sweden, to be interested in switching alliance to the British side against Napoleon, they demanded a compensation. So then the Allied said, okay, then you can get Norway as a compensation, because Denmark-Norway was on Napoleon's side. And then the Norwegians, we don't want just to be given as a package from one country to another. So then they had a National Assembly gathered in a few months. So from April until May, they had elections of representatives in February, and then from April to May, you had a National Assembly then outside Oslo. And then they created a constitution based on the French, the American, and they were enlightened people. They knew everything about everything. So it wasn't a kind of a lot of farmers that didn't know anything about anything. They really were enlightened people. So they constructed the constitution in 1814, which still exists. This is our base for our constitutional life still.
Modern Norway came into being in 1814 as a constitutional monarchy.
Yes, because then the new situation was that we wanted in the full independence then. And then, of course, all the allies said, no, you can't, because you have been promised to Sweden, and that was the premise for Sweden to join the allies. So, and then the Swedish king said, if you don't want to, I'll take you. So then, of course, and that's interesting, because this is the last war that Sweden has been fighting, and that's against us then, just for some weeks in 1814. That was the last war ever between Sweden and a neighboring country. So then, since then, they have been in peace then. So, and after 1814, and of course we gave up then, but of course the big difference was that the union we entered into with Sweden was much more like the union you had between Scotland and England then. Two separate parliaments joining forces, and two separate monarchies merged into one king. So that was what we left as a part of Denmark, but we entered the union with Sweden as a semi-independent country then, with our own institution, and that was then started the modern nation building of Norway then from 1814.
Thank you.
Very thick wall. Yeah.
Is it?
In northern Norway, where this is from, it's normally almost
cold
snowing on these days. You know, in the winter when you're really cold and you put those thick woolen socks on?
Yeah.
That's these.
Okay. I hadn't noticed the socks.
So it's...
Oh, they're magnificent.
And we had no links to Sweden other than the king. So that's the fascinating things. And of course, the only thing, we didn't have a foreign secretary, we didn't have embassies or anything, so that was through Sweden. So that was the main issue why the union didn't last then. So it lasted from 1814 until 1905, and then it was a huge infight between the king and the parliament all the way up to the 1880s, and then it was really a crisis, because then we established the parliamentarian system, that the parliament, you had to have a majority in the parliament to be able to establish a government. And that was the huge democratic principle then in the fighting with the Swedish king. So of course it was a combination between monarchy and parliamentarism, and between Norway and Sweden. So, and then in 1905 it was enough for the Norwegians, because the foreign policy was so different. Sweden is much more east-south, and we are much more west-south. And then we've always had huge, strong ties to Britain then. So of course, and in 1905, before the First World War, because if you want to be an independent nation in Europe, you had to be a monarchy if you were going to be able to communicate with the neighboring. And of course, you had to be allied with some stronghold. And so then we elected the King Haakon, then, who's over there, and who has the monument outside, because he was married to the daughter of Edward VII then. And he was number 2 in Denmark, so he was not hereditary prince, but he was the second prince of the then crown prince. So his grandfather was still king. He was the equivalent of Queen Victoria then. So, and all the royal families were mixed between the English and the Danish family. Their kids had been marrying everywhere. So I
feel like I'm going to have to construct a family tree for this
and it's not a tree, it's a bush. Yeah. So he was married to his cousin, Princess Maud. She was the youngest daughter of Edward VII. And of course, Edward VII was married to Alexandra, who was the sister of Haakon's father. So of course, Maud and Haakon was cousins. So they married, and they imagined a peaceful life where he was a naval officer. They had a small palace outside Sandringham, and then of course they looked forward to a peaceful life between Sandringham and Copenhagen then. But then the Norwegian eyes fell on him then, because he was an ideal candidate, because he was married to an English princess. And he was a nice and decent and modest Danish prince. So, and he was a marvelous king. So he was elected, and he demanded a referendum. The parliament only wanted to elect him, but he said, no, I won't come if you don't have a referendum. So we have actually...
He had a popular mandate as a monarch.
Yes, so that's the fascinating
thing. This is how to run a monarchy.
Yes. So of course he was anonymously elected by the parliament, but then he said, of course, my condition is that I trust that, of course, but I want to have a real mandate from the people. So then then they had a referendum, and he got the 89% of the votes then.
Your queen is lost. This invasion will gain you nothing. We're a democracy. The people have decided.
Star Wars is right. This is possible.
10%. And it's fascinating because, the Norway, as it is, it's actually a much more Republican country than you should imagine regarding that. But in that kind of the whole propaganda, of course, from the Prime Minister and everyone else, we can't be a republic now. We have to be a monarchy. But of course, in real life, we were a republic. We just had a figurehead that was a monarch then. So. Yes. And then he took one of the oldest and most noble royal names then. So he was Prince Carl of Denmark, but he took the name Haakon. And of course, that's, like Henry in Britain. So he was Haakon VII. So he linked his name back to all the Norwegian medieval kings then. So this is the first king of the modern Norway then, since we regained our independence in 1905. So he became king in 1905, and he lived until 1957. King Charles, the present King Charles, he broke tradition now when he invited all kings and queens and head of states to his coronation, because the old tradition that it's the new monarch which is being crowned that is supposed to be the single crowned head in the church, together with the consort. And so, of course, no head of states, as a monarchical head of states, were supposed to be invited. So in previous year, in Queen Elizabeth's coronation and all the previous one, you always only had the hereditary princes and the princesses. Of course, it's the one monarch is supposed to be in focus then. Yeah. The only exception was his wife then, Queen Maud, which also, of course, always remained a princess of the empire, together with, and when her nephew then, George VI, was supposed to be crowned in 1937, she attended. Because in her life, then, of course, it trumped being a princess of the empire than being Queen of Norway. So, so she came there, in all her glory as a princess of the realm. And we are proud then, the aforementioned present King of England, Charles, he's named after him because he was the favorite great uncle of Queen Elizabeth. So his original name was Carl Charles. So in the family, he was always called Uncle Charles. And she named her firstborn then Charles after him, not after Charles II or Charles I. Really? So, and he renamed his son then, and he renamed him Olav. So of course he was named after the Norwegian patron saint then, Saint Olav. So when he became king, he was Olav V. He was their only child. So he grew up, in Oslo as an immigrant prince of Danish-English parents, learning Norwegian. And then, of course, on the outside, and after his death, he was immensely popular too. So when he died, 20 years after he died, he was declared the Norwegian of the century because he was so popular. But now it's a Norwegian historian working in Oxford who has written a huge biography of him, 3 volumes. And he has researched all papers and letters and everything. And he has, of course, discerned that, of course, on the inside he was like British gentry. On the outside he was very Norwegian. So he had this fabulous, combination that is. And he had dyslexia, so he had struggling reading and writing. And when he talked Norwegian, he stuttered. But he was very popular all the same because he was outgoing and nice and funny.
Yes.
But when he talked English, no stuttering, no nothing. He was eloquent in English. But in Norwegian, he was stuttering. But he was such a nice, and on the one side, he was very nice. On the other side, he had an enormous temperament. And he was a military man, of course, so he was... But he was a close friend of George VI then, the father of the late Queen Elizabeth. So George VI was his best man and his cousin and his best man in his wedding then. So. Siemens Mission took over the operation. You have this Ebenezer Church, which were built in 1872, but it became too small. So during the First World War, one realized that we have to have a bigger church. This one was situated on the other side of Rotherhithe, beside Greenland Dock. Uh-huh. And then they found this property, and to make a long story short, in 1927, it was built in 26 and consecrated in 27. And of course, historically then it became also an important building because it was erected, of course, as a living church, operational church, but on the other hand, also as a memorial for the Norwegian seafarers that were killed during World War I. We were neutral during World War I. We served everyone. And of course, the ship owners made a lot of money, but we lost to over 2,000 seafarers that were...
There would effectively be merchant seamen rather than military seamen.
This is merchant. Yeah. Everything, all of this is merchant. And of course, this entrance area here is the memorial area where we have names of all the seafarers that were killed.
Oh my goodness!
Were killed during the war. Yes.
I didn't even see this.
No. So it's a beautiful memorial.
So you can see if you can see just how small this is.
So here you have name of every seafarer that has deceased.
And this is the First World War.
First World War. But then of course it became even more important during World War II because then we were occupied by Nazi Germany, and the king and government went into exile here. And the king, he was an avid churchgoer, so he attended services here all the time. And of course, the king is also the patron of the Norwegian church abroad then. So of course, but not only formally, but also personally, they have a close connection to the church abroad as a home away from home for Norwegians abroad, and they have experienced it themselves. And so that was a surprise attack. But compared to Denmark, where the Germans were in the country when everyone woke up, in Norway, since we had this ocean space between Denmark and us,
yes,
it was we were very ill prepared and ill equipped. But fortunately, the main ships that went into the Oslo fjord that was supposed to take over the capital immediately and take the government and king and everything, that was sunken by torpedoes. The small defense system that we actually had then, and the initiative of the officers there actually doing things. So we sunk the half of the fleet coming into Oslo. So the Germans were really delayed then. So that enabled the king to flee Oslo together with the government and the Speaker of the House. He was very efficient in organizing everything. The Prime Minister, he went into paralyzed, but the Speaker, he was very efficient and he organized everything. And then you have this, this was the night to the 9th of April. The king went up and down the country being followed by German forces, airplanes or military. And it was negotiations then because Hitler, he tried, via his envoys to convince the king that, because he tried to appeal to his dynastic self-image. Mm. But he thought because he was used to the other kings, the king's brother in Denmark, the king's cousin in Sweden, because they were the hereditary princes and they had a self-image of the monarchy being an important political thing. He was very anxious that the monarchy itself shouldn't be political at all. It should be the constitutional. He saw himself as a guardian of the constitution, and the constitution should secure a democratic society. And he didn't want to be enforced to everything. So that's of course why he also became so important, because he said no, you can't split me and the government. And then the Germans start bombing him then instead then. So of course, and then he just reinforced the government because they were just in panic. So you know, we can't, if you are going to do any negotiable agreements with the Germans, I abdicate. so of course, and that was, in Norwegian we have an expression, the king's no, and that's a very important thing. Also, the king said no when it really mattered. Because he always says yes. When you know when the politicians say things, of course the king says yes, because he has a personal opinion. He is the peak of society, and and he's supposed to be a unifier. So of course he hasn't any personal opinions. But here he had a personal opinion in that sense that I have to guard on your behalf. I have to guard the constitution, and what is happening now is unconstitutional. We are occupied. So this is not the voice of the people. This is a foreign power coming here. So his emblem as a age 7, that was at the same time, you know, an emblem of freedom and independence. And that's a fascinating contradiction, you know, that the monarchy and the symbols of the monarchy equivalence freedom. Yeah, that's fabulous. Here you can see the anchor then for the sailors giving their life in the Second World War then. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the original monument for the First World War then, that the Crown Prince Olav, the later King Olav, he inaugurated this at the same day when the church was consecrated. And here you see the text in Norwegian on the inside, and when you go on the outside you have the text in English. Yeah, we are so few here in this country. Every fallen man is brother and friend. We have the dead with us the day we return. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah. And of course, this is the 17th of May, and we have been occupied on the 9th of April. So it's just a month, and the occupation is still in progress. So of course, Norway didn't officially, and we didn't actually capitulate. We just gave in the 7th of June, 1940. And it's quite, you know, it's quite poignant because the 7th of June, 1940, the King Haakon and the government left Tromsø, so left with an English battleship over to England. And he came back on the 7th of June, 1945. And of course, the 7th of June, 1905, the Parliament declared Norway independent. So, of course, it's a very poignant date then. So, 7th of June, 1905, 7th of June, 1940, and 7th of June, 1945. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.